Good afternoon. Hope you're good. Hope you can hear me. Hope the signal is stable. All the hopes in the world. After last week, we couldn't do this show. We had it planned. We were ready and waiting. Obi Hasan, our guest, our partner for Finance Fridays, was ready and waiting, and we couldn't get it through to you. So I'm sorry about that. I've been obviously having to face uproar, complaints all week, but don't worry. Here we are. We're back. The tech seems to be working. So this is where you need to tell me, is it working? Can you hear me loud and clear? Is the mic okay? You know, it was a bit crackly yesterday, apparently. So yeah, I've been trying to twiddle some knobs here and get it all sorted. But it seems to be fairly stable, so that's good. But do let me know where you're tuning in from and whether or not you can hear loud and clear. Really looking forward to this show, especially because it's sort of long awaited now. But it's been based on a lot of questions that we've been receiving from clinic owners, therapy business owners that are then interested in some of the understanding as to how they can sensibly grow their business with trying to minimize the risk of doing so, trying to not leave themselves vulnerable and exposed. And there's some principles here that are applicable across the board, you know, and also there's people that are appropriately attentive to MSK practice and to healthcare generally to understand these principles regardless of what sector or position you're in. I think that these things matter. I think that the shrewd clinician, even if they're not necessarily directly in business, need to recognize these things and also help them to have sympathy and empathy with those that are having to make those sorts of decisions, because the pressure can be really on. And from some of the questions that you've been sending us, there is a sense that some of this stuff does feel overwhelming. It can really affect people's confidence. And so the people that we know best to help with that are Clarity Transformations and Obi Hasan. And he's our partner for these reasons, is that he helps to simplify that and to demystify and also take some of the guesswork out of some of these complex variables. So hopefully we can bring him in a second and hopefully understand what it might be that we can come up with together for solving these problems. So hopefully in a couple of clicks I can bring in Obi and hide my little frame thing, and here he is. Obi, can you hear me?
Hello, yes I can. Hi everybody.
Good. Yeah, brilliant. Oh, thanks so much for joining me again. Really appreciate it. As ever, it's been something that the questions have come in and on a theme, we thought we'd talk about business growth and also the way in which forecasting and management of data can assist with that process. For those that haven't heard us on this before, then obviously we can provide links so that you don't need to give a potted bio of who you are and what you do. You work with us on various different things as a partner on Physio Matters and Therapy Live, but also have been working with me on some of the very things that this topic is about, you know, growth management and forecasting, etc. But to start with, one of the big themes that we've been asked about to cover is about how can we stop business growth, which is what everyone's been looking for. As soon as that starts happening, it can become overwhelming. So firstly, why is it that it can become overwhelming? What factors are in play that can sometimes make that happen?
I think one of the main things working with a lot of businesses that start growing is if we haven't planned for the growth, it's a great bonus to have. But what it does bring is it brings an uncertainty about the rate at which growth happens. And if the business hasn't prepared itself for it in terms of resources, systems, processes, you get into firefighting really quite quickly. It isn't just the amount of time that, let's say, an owner might need to take to start troubleshooting stuff. And I'll give some examples in a minute. For example, it could just be things like having additional clinic space, and it would be having staff is the biggest issue, being able to recruit and manage the capacity and flex the staff that you've currently got, whether you should hire them or not, or whether you should use them as contractors, whether you train your existing staff. Those all become factors that suddenly you have to begin to think about very, very quickly on your feet if you haven't planned it. And then, of course, what that does is, because you begin to start, depending on how fast that growth is coming at you, sometimes you can get away with it and manage it. But if it's coming at you quite fast, or there's a real lump on it, you can get into some real firefighting stuff very, very quickly, which then means you're making very short-term decisions, usually expensive, usually not really sustainable longer term. Either you are putting too much capacity in, you're hiring people left, right, and center. You're not quite in control of the quality. You don't induct people properly. But what all that ends up doing as well, I mean, that's if you like the operational aspects. But the bit it really begins to hurt is the financial aspects at times, that you do begin to lose control of your cash or your money, or collecting or just managing the cash properly. And also how quickly you are spending it, depending on how fast you're growing. So I think there's just a number of factors, because you are reacting to the situation, and in many cases, it feels like a nice problem to have to start with. It very quickly begins to get into a small business anyway that's growing fast into control issues about how you can manage that growth.
I think that you've kind of given away one of the correctives to that problem, which you're saying is planning. If you anticipate it, if you acknowledge that that might emerge, then obviously that's a win. Before we go into that and what that might look like, there are circumstances though, and people will be listening and saying, well, that's all well and good, but here I am. I'm afraid I've made that mistake. I haven't planned for it, and I'm now just at current capacity, and I don't like there is a reputational consequence to success in a way. You know, if you're having to turn customers down, if your waiting list is developing and growing, and you're having to react rather than be proactive, there are people that, you know, we don't want to be sort of saying, which I imagine isn't the point you're wanting to make, is that you should have planned for it and it's tough shit now. You know, you don't need to do that. I'm just thinking what therefore are, in the moment, if you've been put on your heels, you are having to react, what are the key factors then in play for us to try to get on top of this?
No, I think the best thing to do actually is, if you are in that lucky position where you are growing fast and it's just come at you, then the thing is to try and get hold of it. And the way to get hold of it is actually start to sort of and actually do forecasting. And that's why forecasting comes into this. And forecasting, I mean, another name for it would be really, I would call good planning. So if you actually have a tool, a model where you put all your thought processes down, put all the dynamics of the business into, for example, let's say you had a model, something that is like a person sitting in front of you, just happens to be a model. And you say, right, I'm going to input stuff into this model about the operations I know about my business, the different scenarios I know, where my customers come from, what I charge them, how many clinics I've got, my staff, what their skills are, what their capacity is, where I can get new staff, my capacity, my clinic space, and so forth, what my costs are. And I could bung that all in there rather than just the accounts, which give you that information retrospectively. But I put it into a model, and then I say to it, right, now tell me, with this growth coming through to me, what happens to all this income, cost, profits? When do I run out of capacity? And therefore, at what time do I need to start planning for increasing it? What will that cost me? What should I be charging for my service if I continue charging what I do currently? What happens if I don't? What are my staff going to cost me if I train my existing staff, or I increase their capacity, or do a different deal with them to get them to do longer hours or whatever? Or is it worth me going out and actually getting contractors or hiring a new staff altogether? And what does that mean for my cost? Should I go and borrow money? And when do I get my money back? How do I break even from that growth if I invest money into it, and so forth? If you could put that into a model, or let's say a person that was sitting in front of you, and then say, right, now tell me, if I change this, change that, and change the other, what happens over the next 12 months, 6 months, 12 months, or longer, so that I can start making the decisions about, in all these variables, all these different moving around, what's the best way for me to manage them? What if this goes wrong, and what if that goes wrong? How do I best manipulate this to make sure I have got a sensible plan that I then say, this is how I'm going to grow, and that's what I'm going to do. That's when I'm going to hire more staff. That's when I'm going to change my prices or do it differently, or get an extra clinic. Then you have a forecast and a plan. The important thing about that is that's the first thing about how you then get control of it as you are now, to give you some forward proactive look out into the business. The really important bit to this then is, it's not a one-off exercise. The whole idea about doing a forecast, it's a live thing that you roll every single month. Because what you then do is, imagine this model is this person sitting in front of you, and you say, right, so that was my plan. So at the end of the month, say, well, how did you do? And he says, well, actually, compared to what we thought, this happened, that happened, and that happened, or it was brilliant, everything went the way we went to. And then you begin to say, well, why did that happen? So it's a learning tool, and it's something you adjust every single month that actually helps you get better and better. So it begins to take the guesswork, but actually it's not. Good planning is actually about making it more and more accurate. It's a live learning tool as you go along to correct it.
That's interesting. And I think as well, it's useful for people to recognize that if you are caught out by that and you're on your heels and you're feeling like you need to react, it still ends up being not dissimilar information to if you could get ahead of it, which is that in that moment, even though it feels overwhelming, take a minute to pause and try to look forward to what might that look like. There aren't immediate decisions need to be made that aren't part of the analysis. Needs to always be what is to come. Out of interest, what I want to ask the audience that are tuning in live, I want to ask, what do you see as being the key factors affecting growth at the moment, either in your business or any that you're aware of? What do you think in the industry at the moment are the key variables that are limiting or even could be even facilitating growth in therapy business? So please do let us know your thoughts on that, and we can put any questions you might have as well to Obi as we go. Obi, I want to ask though, when creating original forecasting, so I know you're saying about it being a live process and something that keeps getting evaluated. I agree with that, but it's like there's almost this process of budgeting that people do initially, and they kind of look at what that might be over whatever time frame. Should they be accounting for? Should they be doing that as being almost like a utopian analysis, or should they be doing it where they're anticipating unforeseen circumstance? Should they be taking 10-20% off the top of every figure they can come up with? Like, what's your take on that?
Exactly, and I think that's exactly the point about forecasting. So there is a forecasting tool, if you like, and what allows you to do is what's called scenario planning. But in simple terms, that's exactly what it means. What if my growth is 10% less, or it begins to go down as something happens, or it's 10% more than I thought it would be? What is the impact of all the other variables in the organization? What's the impact on my capacity? What's the impact on my on the money? And it allows you to play with that and manage risks. So that is a fundamental part of, I think, doing any forecasting, is to say, whatever my best judgment or plan is, things are going to be slightly different to that. So what is my risk if it's 10% or 20% less? What happens at any point in time? Especially for a fast-growing business, there comes a stage where if it's really growing very fast, you're going to start burning cash very, very quickly. And it's really important to know that if there's a drop-off in business after you've sort of invested in it of 20 to 30, at what point does solvency become a problem? That is one of the key things to understand, or at least you have a very quick high-level idea. If it happens at 20%, then you've already got that sort of in your head, and it just becomes a very quick indicator for you, and that's the advantage of it. So you don't get caught out. You already have a pretty good idea of where, if you like, the limits are of or if you grow by 20%, and at that point you have got to go and invest in a new clinic, for which you might have to borrow money to do, you've got to plan that in advance of you actually getting there, or that's the time you need to take action and what action to take. I mean, some examples that we in one of the finance clinics, we actually ran through a scenario like this when we used pelvic health as an example, setting up a new pelvic health service. But actually it applies to anything where, if you're growing, how do you do a forecast, and what are the factors you take into account, and when you do scenario planning, in knowing how to make sure you safeguard yourself as you grow, or grow well from that. And I think we went through a worked example of how we do that. Some of the things you could, another example here could be if you're looking to exit the business, and you decide that you have a plan over the next 12, 24, 36 months, whatever it is, and you want to grow the business to a certain size and its profits in a certain way, for which you may need to invest a little bit of money or whatever you need to do. And you want to be able to say, well, how do I do that over the next 12 to 24 months to exit the business to get your best valuation? You need to show a certain trend before you exit it, which would really help with the exit value of that business. And again, this sort of forecasting, and then, if you like, the plan that allows you to then to follow that is very valuable.
So that question I asked you guys as to what do you feel are the key variables affecting growth or influencing growth at the moment in therapy business? number of you were mentioning recruitment, and that's something that we've had a question come in from Steve, who asks, how can I confidently avoid over or understaffing my business?
So overstaffing would probably be a nice problem to have, isn't it? Given that if you can't find any staff, if you can overstaff them, I would say you could sell some of their time to others at a premium. If you can get them, that's a good way to make money. Have a recruitment arm to your business. But the point about your question is, how do you if you like, when you shouldn't be taking staff, when it's too early to take the staff on.
Yeah.
And I think the issue is understanding what is your capacity at the moment. And again, one of the things I want to do. So in this forecasting model, you see, I always suggest to people, never do your forecasting starting with pound numbers. The pound numbers are an output of the input you put in there. Your input are always operational drivers. So it would be your number of staff, the hours that they work for you, so that what you do is you work out a capacity model inside this forecast that drives the pound numbers that come out of it. Right. That capacity model, you get your demand coming through from your customers, your clients, and so forth, and the rate at which they come. You put your clinic space as a capacity into that model. You put the hours that you're open, for example. You put your staff and your contractors as a capacity input into that model. And when you've got that model set up to that base, you can see quite clearly how easy it is to start manipulating that. So the answer to your question would be, once you've got that model set up, how do you make sure you don't overstaff or under? Well, the understaffing problem would be quite clear. You will see the demand coming through from your customers, or what you've assumed is happening from clients, what's assumed is happening, and you can see that you can't satisfy it because you maxed out all the staff that you've currently got, or you know that I'm going to need to bring in more contractors, or ask my contractors to buy more of their time. Or you could see that you may have part-time staff already available that you could say, right, maybe you can get them to work longer hours, and again plan that and anticipate that with them. Whatever incentives you have to for people to do that. Overstaffing similarly works. It's the other side of the coin. If you first you look at all these options before you get to the stage where all the existing staff are maxed out, and your model will tell you that depending on how much clients are coming in, and before you hit 100%, so you're at say 95%, you're going to start planning for actually getting more staff. The question then becomes, do I go for contractors, or do I actually get employees? And the answer to that would be, well, how much more growth are you expecting, and how fast is it coming at you? So you may start with contractors, then switch to full-time employees, or you may go for full-time if you can find them. And again, your recruitment campaign needs to start a little bit ahead, doesn't it? Before you hit the buffers, because simply given the induction time and being able to find.
I think in our industry as well, and there's been a few comments since we said we were going to do this, and they came in from last week, was that people saying that in our industry it's difficult. It's easy to recruit maybe someone for 5 hours distributed a week. Someone who's doing a bit of moonlighting in the private practice, and then you've got someone it might be simple to get half time and beyond. But there's this middle ground then between, say, 5 hours and 20 hours that is difficult to recruit. And so that's where I think that overstaffing comes in, whereby if someone's got a need for someone clinical, say 10 to 12 hours a week, and they recognize that then they really struggle to fulfill that, or if they do, they've got to patchwork it between 3 different 4 hours, 3 lots of 4 hours rather than 1 lot of 12 hours. And so it ends up being like a more complex induction need, and it's more distributed. So I think that people end up then thinking, well, what are the key variables that would help me to be confident and to at least try to de-risk the situation, so that if I did take someone on at 20 hours, when at the moment it's only 10 to 12 and narrowly at that, how do we make sure that jump isn't one that really cripples us?
Yeah. So the input of this model that I've described. So let's say we've got your staff and all the hours you've got in there, including your contractors. Now you say, actually, I can only get somebody for 20 hours and I only need 10. Now, if I do that and put them in and give them 20 hours, of course, you're going to end up spending your utilization effectively of that is going to be lower. So you know your cost per pound of your profit is going to go down slightly. And it may be an investment that you feel you need to make, but you could then catch up with that because if the demand is there and it begins to grow, so for a period of time, yes, you have overcapacity, but if you can then catch up and use that in the future as your capacity grows, you will earn it back through the profits that you're making. The other thing you could look at is say, well, I've got to take this person for 20 hours. Now, can I reduce 10 hours somewhere else within what I've currently got to balance it out? And that way, that would be your other way you could do it, depending on how you're using other staff. Right. So you can play with this to see what the best decision is for you. But I agree, if staff are really hard to find, then you may sometimes feel the need for overcapacity, so long as you know that growth is coming, that will then put it to full capacity, or you adjust the time of your existing staff to balance it out.
No, fair play. That makes a lot of sense. I think that how much do you feel that the forecasting and planning aspects of looking forward and trying to anticipate and read that future and revise your best estimate, you're revising that probability, what percentage of the whole piece of this for business growth is it? Because it sounds like you're saying it's a core part. Is it the majority?
If you mean how much time do you need to spend on it, is that what
both?
You mean?
I suppose I was actually meaning importance. I was just thinking when it comes to sort of business growth, and you think of the factors affecting business growth, and it seems like, although appropriately different angles to it, but your analysis is such that if you get this bit right, if you forecast, reforecast, get the planning and trying to read the future type stuff, and therefore use that data to then project what your growth needs are, it sounds like that. Am I thinking it's 80%, 90% of the importance, or where do you see it?
You would expect me to say this, wouldn't you? I think it's 100% important. And the reason I say that, actually, I wouldn't look at this as an exercise I've got to do at the end of the month. Right. I think it's an integral mindset of a business person, because you are constantly in your head, you're doing it anyway. All this does is allow you to bring it out and let this thing talk back to you to say, so how did it go this month, or what did you do? And those 10 variables that you all got juggling in your head, well, actually these 3 happened that way and 4 of those happened that way, and in the future if this happens, that happens. That's the point. It's a mindset. And actually, how much time does it take? Well, there are good forecasting models out there, and I can recommend plenty to people. There's some really good forecasting models. They're simple to use. It's touch of a button, and all you got to do is, first of all, spend the time doing the business planning, which gives you the input into the model. But you've got to have to do that anyway. It actually challenges you and your thinking and your understanding as well. And once you have populated that, which could be a few hours work, once you've populated that with the help of an advisor or someone who knows what they're doing with you, then you've got the model. After that, all you've got to do is spend hardly any time, change a few variables, hit the button, off you go. And then it's the output. It's what is it actually telling you to make business decisions. That's the advantage of it. And that's why I say never start a forecast with pound numbers. You always build the business plan, the model first with the inputs, all the variables you already got going in your head operationally, and then just look back at it every month and see where you are with it.
So am I right in thinking that, because with that, if you just started with the pound numbers and just attributing value straight away, then you're going to miss the opportunity to make those things, because they can be changeable. So your cost, your actual what you charge out, some of your bills will vary, and so if you were to bake in the numbers too early, then it's some of those more changeable factors can't be accounted for as easily. Is that the reason why you make sure you make it?
I mean, the fundamental point is that the numbers are not the drivers. The numbers are the output. The drivers drive the numbers. So, if I said operational activity, I've got 100. I see 100 people in my clinics in 1 week, but it's going to go up to 120. Now, I know what that translates to a pound number, but the way it does it, it's 120 times my price gives me my pound number. Take my costs off, gives me my profit. So you let the activity that increase from 100 to 120 drive the number and all the implications that go with the numbers. So that's what I mean. It's always the operational drivers, which is how you run your businesses anyway. Right. And then you manage the money that goes with it.
Amy asks a question here which tickles me. because I feel like sometimes I miss this as well, is that what if I don't want to grow? I just feel like I feel like I'm obliged to. It's almost like she's
No.
And we've heard that from other people where it's like they know that the demand is high, but they've just not necessarily got the need, the want, the ambition to grow either at this point in time or ever. They're just happy with their lot. What's the consolidation exercise, and how different is it to what we've been talking about?
No, it's a great question. So there are times if you're happy with what you have got, I would then say it's about staying safe and about consolidating. I would then say for the business that you're making, is it the most profitable way that you can run the business? Is it the best? Is it the best way to deliver the business? Have you got the right utilization? Could you be making, I suppose, more profitability by delivering the same service? And how do you consolidate it? The other thing you could do is also, how do I make sure that if we have another lockdown situation, let's say or anything particularly happens, let's say that can affect the business or business goes down, at what point do I need to think about safeguarding myself? What's my solvency level? Have I got 3 months? What's my headroom? So I think it's about managing risk as well, just to make sure that, and if you're happy with what you've got, I'm sure you just want to keep it for as long as it is, and knowing, or you may at some point decide, I've had enough now. I've done this for 25 years. I want to exit it. How do you maximize your exit value from the business you've got, however profitable it may be?
We wouldn't want, because it's a good position to be in, and it also, I think it really speaks to the fact that there shouldn't be this obligation to turn the speed on the treadmill up. Like, if you're feeling happy, you're feeling happy. Like, cash out on it to some degree, Amy, for a period of time, but also then look at that exit. I think as well, making sure that then it'd be gutting if complacency set in, and therefore that was short-lived. And therefore there's a regret of not anticipating things, either downturns or opportunities to uptick, because some people think that that's what they want, and then they end up feeling flat, or they enjoyed the growth curve, and then the consolidation process they sort of fall out of love with it on. I've heard that story as well, but also I've heard it the other way, as you're describing potentially, Amy, is making sure you don't feel obliged. You remember why you're in it. You're trying to create a circumstance of work of which you enjoy. So, please do enjoy it. And I'm pleased to hear that you might be in that situation. Before we go, Obi, can you tell us a little bit about, so in the description, there's a link to Obi's next workshop, which is absolutely, it's doing really well. I don't know if it might even have sold out by now, but hopefully just click onto the page and you can find out. But there should be some tickets available to your next workshop, which is on this very topic, and then aspiring towards sort of some future educational materials for therapy business owners.
So I think we're running that on the 27th, I think, of this month, and it will be about what this workshop is about. It's a free workshop, but what it's about how do you do these forecasts? Everything we've talked about today, let's use an example. Let's actually go through how you create a forecast. And it will also cover things like, if you're happy with your lot, for example, what do you do? Having a business plan is actually really, really important. But it will go through the tools that you can use to do this forecast, the inputs that I've talked about, to drive the model, and the factors you need to consider, and then the output you get from a forecast like that, and how to interpret that. So it'll give you some insight into that. Of course, it won't be the full training course, because the training course will take more time to do, and that what comes later. That actually shows you how to do all of it properly. But this gives you the insight into what are the inputs, what sort of output you get, how do you make those sort of decisions, and therefore what's the benefit of doing these things in the first place, and whether you want to grow or not, as the case may be.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, if to check the description wherever it is you're listening to this or watching this, for some reason it's not letting me play around with the chat as I usually do, and so I was going to post the link in and do it as a pop-up, but I can't do it. There's an Eventbrite link to Obi's workshop there that will be really popular and is already doing really well, and I'm not surprised, because there's a massive need for that at the moment. And I think it's one of them things that's a real shame if it's done badly. It's a real shame. It can really stress people out. We hear from you all the time who are interacting with our clinical materials and stuff and just feeling like they don't know where to go to get some of that information in a way that is trustworthy and credible. And that's why we've decided to work with Obi and Clarity, is because it does really provide that clarity, which is no surprise. So I really do appreciate you, and thank you for all you're doing for our side of the industry, really. Obi, it's been fascinating to see and proving itself very popular. Get in touch with us or with Obi to find out more about what we can do to help you, especially with the more and more resources and opportunities emerging, including consultancy with Obi himself. So that'll do for now. I think that's us at 30 minutes. It flies by, doesn't it? But thanks again for your time, mate.
Thank you. See you at the clinic.
Yes, nice one. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.